Hello, my name is Adam Winrich, 34-time Guinness World Record holder for whip cracking, here with Jack Lepiarz, Jacques the Whipper. How many records do you hold, Jack?
Hold one, 4 times set.
4-time Guinness World Record holder. And this is a little bit of a video about some David Morgan bullwhips, in particular, the oldest David Morgan bullwhips that I know to exist. And the reason we have Jack here today is because Jack grew up watching his dad be a whip performer at circuses and Renaissance festivals, and his dad used exclusively David Morgan bullwhips. So while some of us may idolize David Morgan bullwhips because of their use in the Indiana Jones movies, Jack has a much more personal connection with David Morgan whips. And before we have Jack describe that, I want to show you what I mean about the oldest David Morgan whips known to exist. They're standing right here. You hold one, Jack. I'll hold the other one. So these two bull whips I have here are 12 foot long, I believe made from kip skin. Mark Allen, who used to own Western Stage Props, bought these two bull whips from David Morgan in 1973. 1973 was the year that the kangaroo embargo started. For anyone that's into Indiana Jones prop lore, we're aware that maybe some of the whips in the very first Indiana Jones movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, would have had, some of them must have been made out of cowhide or kip skin, calf skin, because they were made before the kangaroo embargo ended in 1981. So these would have been made by David right when the embargo began in 1973. And one interesting little bit about it, you're going to see kind of how floppy they are. So if you ever see one of the whips in Raiders of the Lost Ark and it's like really floppy or really hangs and is loose on his belt, that was probably one of the whips made from kip skin. And we can see these are older based on how thick the handles are. And also you can compare them to these other two 12-footers I have right here. These are made from kangaroo leather, and I believe they're made in 1981 or possibly 1982, but I think 1981. And you should be able to see a massive difference in the thickness of the handle. So not only is the cowhide a little bit thicker, I think David also changed his construction method to be able to make the handle smaller. And we're going to crack these in a little bit. But Jack, tell us a little bit more about you growing up around David Morgan bullwhips.
Well, I mean, so I think for me, I didn't even realize that it was all that big of a thing because I learned how to crack a whip on a David Morgan bullwhip. My dad had a bunch of old whips of varying quality. But so when I started cracking whips more and doing my own show, that was the style that I wanted to crack. So this is not a David Morgan, but I had it custom made to be more like a David Morgan whip. Joe Strain, 2007. Normally his whip would have been pretty similar to a David Morgan just without this wrist loop, but I wanted the wrist loop because all my dad's whips had wrist loops. And otherwise it's just a 6-foot bullwhip that I used in my show for approximately 6, 7, 8 years. And for me, growing up, especially, like I would go with my dad, we'd go do a show somewhere, and I had about 10 minutes either before the show or after the show where I got to crack his whips. Not very often. There were some shows where he'd be like, no, we got to pack up, you're not allowed to crack the whip today. But that was basically how I practiced growing up. It wasn't until, I got older, started actually doing some circus performing with him, and not just being essentially his set crew, his tech crew. That he got me my own whip. They were not David Morgans. But now it's an interesting experience to go back to those David Morgans after cracking so many performance hybrids, cracking other whips. I cracked a bunch of his for a video we did recently talking about like doing tricks from the old Indiana Jones movies ahead of the new Indiana Jones movie. And I'm just cracking his whips, and I was like, I like mine better. These old ones, they just don't have enough oomph behind them for me.
Yeah, there is something specific about the David Morgan design, is that he was trying to make a whip that cracked the way he wanted it to crack. He wanted a bullwhip with a short, heavy handle with lead in the butt end. And that's part of how we know these two old 1973 whips have to be David Morgan whips, because the whips David Morgan imported from Australia didn't have a steel spike in the handle or lead in the butt. So it's something very signature to what David would do, because he wanted to make a whip that cracked the way he thought it should crack. But nowadays, like a lot of performers actually aren't using David Morgan whips in their shows because there's so many more options and so many other types of whips that are flashier to use on stage, like performance hybrid whips made from nylon that both Jack and I use a lot. I think what we're going to do, Jack, we're going to turn the camera around just so we can get a couple close-up shots of these 12-footers for the whip nerds out there that want to see more detail, and we'll lay them next to these 1981 12-footers, so you can see some of the differences. And then we're gonna go crack these whips that are over 50 years old.
Crack these collector's items that belong in a museum.
They probably belong in a museum, but they're mine, and I don't intend to build a museum because that would be a money pit.
Let's go.
Let's look at some details. We'll give you some close-up looks at these two 1973 12-foot whips. So I would like to point out some standard features of a David Morgan bullwhip that we can identify here. We have a 6-strand wrist loop. That's very standard. Those didn't come on Australian whips that David imported. We've got the classic David Morgan Turk's head, which is a 5-part, 4-bite, 3-pass Turk's head. And of course the diamond braiding on the grip. And then we have another 4x5 or 5x4 Turk's head here at the transition of 2 passes. And some other classic stuff. Of course, it's a 12-strand braid, and then ends with the classic David Morgan fall hitches right here with a white hide fall. That is a replacement at some point. And Jack, what was your question about these?
I look at this whip here on the right, and I see the handle is bent a little bit before you reach the braid of the whip. So I'm wondering why. What's with the bending on both these handles? Now that I look at them.
So I believe the bend here is because David actually put the knot after the handle foundation ends. So on these, the handle foundation might end right here or somewhere in here. And then he switched his pattern from the diamond braid to the regular whipmaker's chevron, plait, whatever you want to call it. And then put the knot to cover the transition and the braiding. But that means the knot is not sitting on the spike, which is a fun little thing that real Indiana Jones fanatics stress about, is they want the look of the long handle. They want the knot all the way there. So we look at these being the oldest David Morgan whips I know to exist. And you see that back then he did put the knot past the handle foundation for an extra long look. And we can compare it to this 1981 12-foot David Morgan bullwhip I have. You can see how long the handle looks by comparison, and in this instance the transition knot is sitting right on the end of the spike. And then as David continued to make whips, he thought it was more and more durable to move it closer to his butt knot and make the diamond section a little bit shorter.
Now here's a whip making question for you, because I have an old Joe Strain. It was the first real leather whip I got where this knot is here, but then the spike continues, the handle, it stays stiff for maybe another inch and a half after that. Would that be any intentional design choice, or is that just, it's how it happened?
Oh, that's probably an intentional design choice. You'll see that on some whips, some people like to have the look of a shorter grip, but they actually want a longer handle. So that's just a design choice. Any other questions about these before we go crack them?
How much are they worth?
How much are these whips worth? Okay, we'll do this moment. So I will tell you that with these two 1981 12-footers, I bought them from Christ King for $700 each, and with no intention of ever selling them, but I did put them in a video of mine once where I just threw them in for a little sizzle in the video, and I said I would sell one of them for $3,000, thinking no one would ever take me up on that. And then someone came back a little while later like, hey, do you still got that 12-foot David Morgan bullwhip for $3,000? And I was like, sorry, that was a joke. I'm not going to sell it for that much. So based on that reaction, and I don't know if David Morgan prices are coming down a little bit, certainly I haven't seen many for sale this year, that we can just throw out that these are each worth $3,000. And then each one of these, I paid Mark Allen $2,000 for each one, because for me, being a die-hard David Morgan collector, knowing that these are one-off whips, and Mark Allen is well known in the Western performance scene, that I thought they were worth $2,000 a piece. I was happy to pay it. He thought I was a little bit nutty. Maybe I could have got them for less. And I have no plans to sell either of these, and I haven't put them up in a sizzle video to try to see if somebody would want to pay me more. But a fun little bit about, we both work Renaissance festivals. Here, I'll zoom out, Jack. Yeah. Jack and I both work Renaissance festivals. And as far as trying to figure out the value of something, apparently at one of the festivals around the country, the owner would put it up for sale, have people come in and make offers. Then he would find out what it's worth and then tell everybody, hey, just kidding. But then he would find out what it was worth. So kind of an unscrupulous way to find out what something is worth, but that's kind of how I found out how valuable my 281 12-foot Morgans are.
Good to know.
Well, Jack, grab yourself an armful of whips and let's go crack them.
Let's go.
So we are each holding one of the whips from 1973 and then one of the whips from approximately 1981, and then we can kind of each compare them. So Jack, I'll go first so you can kind of see how gentle I'm going to be with these bull whips that are over, well, this one's over 50 years old in 1973. So when people go to crack David Morgan whips, the main thing David built them for was for doing flicks, particularly the overhand flick was the main thing he would crack to test his whips. And he could also do like an overhead crack and a fast figure eight, but mainly it was the flick that he was doing. There's a good overhead crack, little combo. And because of the lead in the butt, it actually makes the whip functionally quieter than if the handle were lighter. So really with the lead in the butt, it's only gonna help kind of make the whip feel lighter on the arm and make the flick a little bit easier. Let's try a backhand flick. Oh, missed that one. Forehand, backhand. And that's the one that we believe is made out of cowhide. Now I'll try a couple with the kangaroo hide whip. Yeah, the kangaroo one already feels like louder, faster, and more responsive.
That is so much crisper.
All right, Jack, you give it a try.
All right, let's see. Start with the old school one. Let's see. And we're going to take it so gentle. Now my technique isn't quite as good as Adam's. I can get a light crack out of it, but nothing crazy. Try a nice light overhead crack. That feels good for me now. I'm just too, I can hear it creaking around.
I'll take that one.
Yeah. This one I expect. This I've cracked before, not this particular whip, but my dad has functionally the same whip at home. And we used one for a video we did last year. Yeah, that one I'm quite used to. So much crisper, the response time is so much better on that.
Video.
Said, I have to muscle my cracks more than you do, so.
Video about some really old David Morgan bull whips. My name is Adam Winrich with Joxy Whipper. Thanks for watching.